Hi there, everybody. This is Saul Newton, president of the Wisconsin Veterans Chamber of Commerce, filling in for Adam, who is taking some well-deserved vacation time. Happy to host this week's Office Hours Live, bringing you information about resources and support and things that are available to Wisconsin's veteran business community and veterans and service members across the state. Today, we're really excited to have JC Moore join us to discuss veteran treatment courts across the state. So JC will be joining us in just 1 minute. If you have any questions or if you have any comments, please leave those comments in for us, whether you're watching on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Twitch. Leave us a comment, leave us a question, and we'd be happy to answer those. So without further ado, let me bring in JC here. And there he is. Hi, JC. How are you today?
Hi, Saul. I'm doing good. How about you?
Doing very well. Thanks for joining us and telling us a little bit about veteran treatment courts. I guess as a good place to start, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your background? Because you have a military background.
I do. First off, before I do that, I just want to say thanks to both you and the Veterans Chamber of Commerce for allowing me to come on and talk to a topic which is really near and dear to my heart based on what I've done over the last decade. That is veterans treatment courts. So very briefly about me, I do have a military background. I got out of the Army Reserve. I retired actually in 2016 as a bird colonel after 30 years of service in both the Guard and Reserves. Had 2 tours after 9/11, both of which were primarily doing training missions, but my military history goes back a ways, the 30 years. I actually have 2 sons that are also in the military too. I have one that you and I talked a little bit about before the program started. He just got off active duty in the Marine Corps. And then I have another son who's a lieutenant in the Space Force, believe it or not. So,
Really?
Interesting assignments, most of which I can't talk about because it's all classified anyhow. So, so I do have some pretty significant military roots. And of course, beyond that, I also have been in the legal community for many years. I have been practicing, I became a lawyer in 1992 and started with the Public Defender's Office in 1993. And then I became a court commissioner in Milwaukee County, which is what I currently do in 2014. Long history in the military community, long history in the legal community, and I was happy to be able to put all of those skills to good use and combine them in order to help start up the Veterans Court in Milwaukee County, and also to remain involved in treatment courts really across the state. I just stepped down from position as the board president for the Wisconsin Association of Treatment Court Professionals, which is a nonprofit which does the training and advocacy for treatment courts really across the state of Wisconsin, and veterans treatment courts are included in that. We have over 90 treatment courts across the state of Wisconsin in most of the counties, not all, but most. Veterans courts are only one type of treatment courts. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but there are various different types of treatment courts. Some of which deal with individuals which have substance abuse issues, some with mental health issues, some that focus on specific types of offenders like people who have been charged with drunk driving, some that are focused on reuniting addicted parents with children, or making sure that babies remain healthy and in the community. So a lot of different types of treatment courts out there. Veterans courts are a significant part of it, but they're only one of them. So,
sure. And before we go on, I'm going to welcome our VP of membership here, Christian Thornton, to join us as well. So it'll be myself and Christian, and I'm just playing around with the different layouts, so bear with me here. Christian, how's it going?
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you.
So we were just talking about JC's history in the military. He has, in addition to his own service, he has 2 sons who serve. So JC, how did you go from serving in the military to working on veteran treatment courts? What attracted you to this area or this issue?
Sure. So, as I said, I became a public defender back in the early 90s when we were smack dab in the middle of the war on drugs. And so throughout the 90s, I ended up representing people who may have been in possession of some amount of drugs, may have been charged with delivering some, and many times was associated with their own substance abuse disorder. And as many of your viewers probably recall, the end result of the war on drugs was a lot of people that were locked up because of their possession or delivery of drugs that were connected to their own substance abuse. And early on, I kind of got the message that there's got to be a better way to address this, as opposed to just locking people up or putting them on a period of probation many times was ineffective. In the early 2000s, I got involved with a group of individuals who started looking into the possibility of setting up a drug treatment court in Milwaukee County. Milwaukee had looked at the possibility of a drug treatment court earlier in the 90s. That didn't happen. So we were trying to resurrect the possibility of starting it up again. It was myself and other community justice stakeholders in Milwaukee County. Started that process, but shortly thereafter, that in 2004, 2005, I get called to active duty and spent, as I said before, 2 tours on active duty. In the meantime, though, they picked up the ball and rolled with it, and they were able to start Milwaukee's drug court in 2009. It wasn't the first drug court in the state by any stretch of the imagination. The first one was in 1996 in Dane County, but they were successful in doing it. While I was on active duty, though, towards the end, I got a call from my civilian boss. I still had a lot of things going on active duty, trying to mobilize troops through Fort McCoy, going to Iraq and Afghanistan. But on the side, he contacted me and said, JC, we've got this thing called Veterans Court, and we want you to take a look at it when you come back to us after serving. So I tucked that in the back, focused on other things, and then when I came off of active duty, I became involved in the start of putting a veterans court in place in Milwaukee County. And after a couple of years of working on it, myself and some of the other criminal justice stakeholders in Milwaukee were successful in doing that. We started the program up in 2012, and it's been running ever since. Since then, the program's had 360 vets that have come through it. So a little more than 36 vets a year. And the success rate is at a pretty remarkable 78%. So it's a great program. We're excited about it. It's not unlike many of the other treatment court programs that we have, not just in Milwaukee, but across the state. Milwaukee's got an adult drug court program. It's got a program focused on reuniting families with children that are taken away. It's the family drug court program. They also have a program for healthy infants out there too, all of which have very similar, very successful numbers. But I was honored to be involved in setting up the Milwaukee Veterans Court program, and I've stayed involved in the other programs as well along with the ones across the state through WVCC.
So before we get into the details of the veteran treatment court, can you explain to those who aren't familiar what is a treatment court? Period. You've mentioned that there are several different types, but what are these treatment courts and how do they work?
Sure. So a little bit of history, and I apologize if I've already talked too much about the history of both myself and these programs. But I wasn't the only one who came to the conclusion back during the war on drugs that locking people up because of their addiction issues just wasn't working. The first people to come to that conclusion was a number of judges down in Miami in the late 80s. And they started to look at different ways to address the issue, short of just having some judge up on the stand say, you need to stop doing drugs or you're going to go to jail, because we all know that just doesn't work. So they came up with this treatment court model. And treatment courts are very different from what people might see on TV or what they might see if they walked into just a run-of-the-mill courtroom anywhere across the state. If you walked into a courtroom across the state, you'd see a judge, you'd see lawyers on both sides, and if it was a criminal court, you'd see the defendant in the middle, represented by the lawyers, and the lawyers would be kind of slugging it out in order to have their particular side win. It's very adversarial. And if the person who's charged with a crime in the regular court is convicted of it, then maybe they get placed on probation. Maybe they end up doing some jail time. Maybe if it's serious enough, they go to prison. Those are all outcomes which the treatment courts try to avoid for obvious reasons. As I said before, it doesn't make much sense to lock someone up and put them in a place like jail or prison where they're getting minimal, if no, treatment for their particular issue. And so the treatment courts kind of flip the script a little bit. So instead of just having two lawyers on either side and a judge up on the bench making decisions, the judge is working with a team of professionals across various disciplines. So I kind of liken it to, I mean, we're talking about veterans courts and you people that from a military background that are zooming in. I kind of liken it to what a commander does. A commander makes decisions with the input of his or her staff. They have those specialists, you know, the personnel person, the operations person, the intelligence person, all of whom are providing information to them in order to be able to make a decision about what to do next. Treatment courts operate the exact same way, because that judge, instead of just having the two lawyers, one on either side, saying, do it this way, no, do it this way, because the law says so, they have a team, and that team is comprised of a treatment provider, of course, the lawyers, because this is court, but also folks like law enforcement, someone from probation and parole. There's a coordinator. In the case of veterans court, they have someone called a Veterans Justice Outreach Coordinator, who's kind of like a liaison with VA, and is able to provide information about how the vet is doing at VA and get them connected up with services. But the point is that that judge has that whole team that's working together in order to provide information to the judge about the decisions that he or she has to make, and recommend things that can optimize the outcome for the veteran or for any participant that's in a treatment court. You don't just have the lawyers that are being adversarial. Everyone's working together in a collaborative nature in order to address the needs of the participant. It's a court program, and there are restrictions, and the people that are appearing in these, that are participating in these programs, are charged with crimes, and many times very serious crimes. Most courts, most of these types of treatment courts don't have violent offenders, but some do, and veterans courts are no exception, because many times veterans present after having done some very serious and sometimes violent things. But the point is that these folks appear in front of them, and they are high risk, high need participants. And so there needs to be some accountability because, as I said, it's a court program. But the accountability focuses on reinforcing good behavior for the participants. So if the participant or the vet did really well in treatment that week or has made significant strides, then the judge commends them on it. So if you walked into a treatment court and you saw what was going on, you'd see a lot of people clapping for the person who had been sober for a period of time. You'd see the judge talking about what a good job the person has had. Maybe you would see the person get incentives about for what they've done, maybe in the form of a gift card or just verbal praise or something along those lines. You'd also see the judge responding to things that the person may not have done well. So like, for instance, if they didn't make it to treatment that week, if they violated some other rule, the judge would be responding by imposing some sort of sanction. And the sanction doesn't necessarily have to be the person just going to jail. It can be additional restrictions. It can be making the person sit and talk about what happened. There's a lot of different responses that could be there. The point is that the judge and the team respond to the good stuff and the bad stuff that the participant does, and they reinforce the good stuff and they respond to the bad stuff. Plus, there's additional accountability associated with it. So there might be some restrictions on where they can go, what they can do. They might have to go through treatment. They might have to be supervised by a probation officer. So there's a long list of things that they have to do in order to be successful in the programs. And the programs are long. Most of the time they lasted a year and a half to 2 years. But for people with a serious substance abuse issue or a serious mental health issue that are justice involved, it takes that level of supervision and that level of accountability and that level of help in order to be able to address those issues and get them back on the right track. And just in terms of illustrating the power of these programs, let me do that by talking to you about my first client in the Veterans Court after we set that program up in 2012. And let's call him Joe because, it's the military. Everyone goes by Joe, right? So Joe was my client, and he was a Wisconsin Guard member, and he had been deployed to Afghanistan. And when he was in Afghanistan, he did what's called route clearance. And some of your viewers might be familiar with that, but for those that aren't, it was those engineers that would drive around on the roads in specialized vehicles looking for the IEDs, the roadside bombs, so that they could be removed and so you could have freedom of traffic on the different roads. And that's what he did in Afghanistan. And needless to say, because he drove around in these specialized vehicles looking for bombs and trying to remove them, he got blown up a couple of times. And so he suffered some back injuries. He went to VA. He was prescribed opiates at VA. And his use of opiates progressed into an addiction. At one point in time, he switched over to heroin. And when he didn't have the means to get the heroin, he resorted to burglaries. And he committed a number of different burglaries in the process. That's when we got him into the Veterans Court. Now, if we hadn't got him into the Veterans Court, he would have gone in front of a judge. Maybe he would have worked out a plea bargain. Maybe he would have gone on probation. Maybe he would have gone on prison, or maybe he would have gone to prison. But that would mean that he was a convicted felon. He would have done some time. His substance abuse disorder wouldn't have received the necessary treatment that it did, and maybe it would have led to him committing new crimes after he got out. This way, instead, when we got him into the Veterans Court, he successfully completed it. He was a graduate. He didn't have a criminal record because his cases were dismissed based on what he did. He finished the treatment. He got sober. He went back to school. He served in the military again for a short period of time. And last I was in touch with him, he had just recently been married, and he had purchased his first home. But that's the power of these programs. They save lives, they reunite families, and they turn people who have the potential to be productive members of society into what we're trying to do, and they do it effectively.
That's incredible. We do have a couple of comments here from Dr. Jennifer Potts saying that this is a great option for Milwaukee veterans, and she works with Central City veterans, so she will share the word. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Potts. For anyone else who's watching across various platforms, if you have any questions for JC, if you have any comments as we're continuing our discussion here, please leave them in the chat box or in the comments area, and we'll be sure to share them. So after going over kind of reviewing what these treatment courts are, what makes veteran treatment courts kind of unique in terms of other types of alternative treatment courts that are available?
So I guess the biggest thing that makes it unique from some of the other types of courts which follow the treatment court model, and like I said, all of them are based on a similar structure to that first court that was started in Miami in the late 80s. The thing that sets the Veterans Court apart is, number one, the fact that they really try and recreate the veteran culture. So if you walked into the Milwaukee Veterans Court on the day that we hold court, and it's done every Wednesday morning, any of your viewers who want to come in and see it, I'm sure that Judge Cindy Davis would be happy to have you do it. But if they want to just walk in and see it, you would see the service flags, you would see the service symbols, you would see veteran mentors that were there. We'll talk about veteran mentors in just a second because they're a huge part of this. And you would see efforts to try and make it seem like the military experience. Instead of having the parties sit down, including the participant, the veteran stands and talks to the judge, just like that soldier or sailor or airman would stand before the commanding officer when they were actually serving in the military. So they really try and recreate that because, I mean, at the end of the day, these folks that are coming in, many times the time that they did best was when they were in the service. You know, that was when they were accomplishing great things, when they were serving their country, when they were deployed. And so we want to make sure that they are able to connect what's happening now to what they accomplished back then too. Now, that's not always the case. You know, I mean, many veterans present with significant trauma issues, PTSD. And so the military was obviously the source of that PTSD in many instances, especially for combat vets. So we're always careful to make sure that what's going on doesn't trigger some of those past events and make things worse for the vets. But on average, they try and recreate that military atmosphere because it's a positive thing. The second thing that sets veterans treatment courts apart is the use of what are called veteran mentors. And in order to illustrate that, I'm going to once again tell you another story. The very first veteran court was started by a judge named Robert Russell in Buffalo, New York in 2008, I believe. And he was a drug treatment court judge, just like any other drug treatment court judge, but he had a veteran in his program. And he was really struggling with that veteran and the veteran substance use issues and the veteran complying with the program. But he also had two team members who happened to be veterans themselves. They were both Vietnam veterans. One unfortunately passed away. The other one, though, is still working for the judge in Buffalo, New York, and he's actually a national presenter But those Vietnam veterans said, "Judge, let us give it a shot." So they took the participant out who was struggling, and they had some discussions with him, and they brought him back into the courtroom, and he appeared in front of the judge. And the way Judge Russell tells it, there was an immediate change in the demeanor of the veteran. Instead of the veteran kind of slouching and looking despondent and looking like he wasn't going to be able to do it, he was up, he was standing at parade rest, he was looking the judge dead in the eye. And he said, "Judge, I'll try." And the reason why it worked was because these two vets were able to take him out and have discussions with him, vet to vet, about what he could do, what they could do for him, that sort of thing. I kind of liken it to the relationship between a soldier or sailor or airman and the non-commissioned officer that's working with them. They take them out, they work with them, they have that heart-to-heart. Maybe it's a tough discussion, but at the end of the day, it helps that person. And that's what these veteran mentors offer. And so all of the other veterans courts across the United States make use of those veteran mentors. And they're not therapists, they're not treatment providers, they're not law enforcement. Maybe they have their own lived experience in terms of substance use issues or mental health issues that they've been able to get past, but that's not a requirement. The bottom line is that they're vets that want to work with other vets that are involved in the criminal justice system, and they want to help. And we're lucky enough to have those folks working with us in Milwaukee. We have a great coordinator who lines up different veteran mentors in order to be able to assist the participants. But like I said, that's a feature that exists regardless of what veterans court you go to. And other treatment courts are really starting to figure out that what's been a big component of veterans courts early on, these veteran mentors, is also a big component, or should be a big component, of the other programs. Peer specialists, people that can just kind of sit you down, talk to you, help you work through your problems. They're becoming a bigger and bigger feature in treatment courts across the state. But it really kind of started with the veteran mentors going back to 2008 in Buffalo, and what's come from that since in courts across the United States. And there are over 470 veterans courts across the United States. Wisconsin has 10. And they're great programs. They're very successful. Their numbers are very similar to the ones that I talked about in Milwaukee. And they're a great asset for justice-involved vets.
That actually leads to what was going to be my next question is, are veteran treatment courts in every county in the state, or how are they kind of laid out across the state of Wisconsin?
Yeah, unfortunately, I wish we could say that we had veteran treatment courts in every county, but we haven't been able to do that. That said, there's a number of them. As I said before, there are 10 across the state. Some of them just focus on a particular county, like Milwaukee. We have numbers sufficient to be able to keep us busy all the time. Some are more regional. So, like, for instance, there's a court that handles Racine, Kenosha, and Walworth County. Many times they're co-located with VA healthcare centers, but not always. Especially the regional ones, those are frequently located next to a VA healthcare center because for most of these programs, VA provides the treatment. That's why these programs make so much sense, is because in the case of the other treatment courts, they take a lot of time. There's a lot of expense. There's a lot of treatment that goes along with it. And the payoff is huge. But in the case of veterans courts, that's already there. I mean, the vets have access, at least ones that are eligible for VA healthcare, they have access to really the multitude of services that VA has. Even if it's not VA, there are other organizations out there that provide the additional services, whether it's Vet Center or other nonprofits. They've got the services available. It's just a matter of making use of them and making them part of the veteran court process. So The services are out there. The veterans courts have just figured out how to leverage them. But I mean, from the standpoint of the community, it just makes sense because the resources are there. We just figure out how to use them in a framework that maximizes their effectiveness in a criminal justice setting.
And you touched on something that I was also going to ask about. There's been a lot of discussion recently about bad paper discharges and different discharge qualifications. Are there restrictions on who can participate in a veteran treatment court based on their discharge status, or is part of the treatment court process maybe looking at upgrading those discharge statuses or helping veterans access care through the VA?
Yeah. So it really varies from program to program. I know with Milwaukee, the only type of discharge that we don't allow into the program is a flat out dishonorable. But I mean, as we both know, there are a lot of different permutations in between that and an honorable. We allow all of those into Milwaukee's program. But that varies dependent upon the program, and a lot of it has to do with the availability of resources. In Milwaukee, we are lucky enough to have not just VA, but a broad array of other veterans-related nonprofits that provide services. We work very closely with CVI. We've worked very closely with the Vet Center. So we can rely on those other organizations in order to provide the level of care that's necessary. But if you go to other counties, especially the rural counties, VA might be the only game in town for purposes of providing treatment. And so in those programs, they might be restricted to only allowing vets that have VA healthcare and are VA eligible into their program because they don't have the available resources to do it otherwise. I wish we could take care of everyone that ever wore a uniform, but unfortunately we can't do that. Now, that said, for those folks that have those bad paper discharge, there are a lot of organizations out there that are ready, willing, and able to help them increase their discharge so that they don't have that dishonorable. Because we all know that many times the reason that they ended up leaving the service was with the dishonorable was because of conditions that that got them in trouble that arose out of their service and may eventually lead into their involvement with the criminal justice system. So, I mean, it's kind of like a downward spiral. So it's important that they have access to that. Plus, I think it's also important, and this isn't always the case with every program, but it's important that if the resources are there, that the program addresses veterans that don't necessarily, that might have a good discharge, but don't necessarily have access to VA healthcare. And we all know that, especially in the case of guardsmen and reservists, there are a lot of them out there that wore the uniform, that served honorably, but they just don't qualify for VA services. Milwaukee is lucky enough that we've got the treatment in place and the other services in place to be able to address those. Unfortunately, that's not always the case.
Mm-hmm. So if we're coming up on our time here, as Adam would say, kind of rounding third and coming on home. If someone, first of all, if someone's interested in getting involved with a veteran treatment court that's established near them, how can they do that? How can they maybe they're interested in being a peer support specialist? Maybe they're interested in providing legal support, or they have some of those treatment options at their disposal. How can they get involved with their local treatment court?
So most, if not all, of the veterans courts have court coordinators. The best way to approach a veterans court is to go through the court coordinator, because they are really the person who's got their thumb on the pulse beat of everything having to do with the veterans court. Most of the time, this information is just on the court's website. Most of these programs have just a website. If your viewers are interested, though, they can certainly contact the Wisconsin Association of Treatment Court Professionals. We maintain a list of all of the different coordinators across the state, not just for veterans courts, but for all the different treatment courts where they have it, as well as the other staff. Also, there's a statewide treatment court coordinator. Her name is Heather Kierzik. She works out of the Director of State Courts office. She can provide the information too, but reaching out to that coordinator is really the best way to do it. And then if the person is interested in serving as a mentor, most of the programs have mentor coordinators that are responsible for kind of running herd on all of the different mentors, making sure that they're trained, making sure they're connected with participants, making sure that if there's information that needs to be provided back to the court, that it happens. The mentor coordinator can help set them up with services. But I mean, let's face it, a lot of times people want to contribute to the program, but they don't have the time, they don't have the ability to be able to serve as a mentor coordinator, or as a mentor, I should say. There are a lot of other ways, though, that that vets can support the programs. For your employers that are out there, these vets, when they make it through their programs and they get past their addiction issues or their mental health issues or the other issues that cause them to become involved in the criminal justice system, they need employment a lot of times. And they've got the skills, they learned the skills before. And I mean, vets are uniquely positioned because they've got education, they had some skills that they were able to exercise in the military. They're used to structure. They just need to get past the problems that cause them to get involved in the criminal justice system, and then they can get back to work. And so to the extent that you've got employers that are out there, having that ready pool of jobs for these vets and other participants is a huge thing. The other thing that I think is really kind of critical is support for the programs. Treatment courts enjoy broad bipartisan support. We have for a long time. Since 2007, there's been a fund in place on the state level that has really helped grow treatment courts across the state of Wisconsin. It's called the TAD program. It has been grown by the legislature. Unfortunately, with this last budget, it didn't grow as much as we would have liked. The governor had requested $15 million. It was only increased by about $2.5 million. I understand that there's a variety of different things that are competing, but the point is that support for these programs is really what drives the availability of money and personnel to be able to put them in place. And veterans courts, just like other treatment courts, are no exception. We rely on the TAD funding many times in order to get things in place. So get the word out, whether it's with your legislator, with local government, with the criminal justice coordinating councils for that particular county. If the county is interested in setting one up and doesn't have one, just make sure that they understand that there is support for the veterans courts. And then finally, the last thing is financial support. Your viewers might say, courts, why do courts need financial support? They're supported through our tax dollars, just like the judges and the DAs and the probation officers. Yes, they are, but there's a lot of services that aren't supported by your tax dollars. Things like ancillary services, maybe transportation. Maybe you've got a veterans court that's up north where you don't have transportation that's in place, and the guy's got to get to treatment, he's got to get to other stuff, but he doesn't have a car. Transportation sometimes can be provided for them. There's always a need for those incentives that we talked about where we reinforce good behavior. Courts struggle with trying to come up with the money to be able to do these extra things to make the program successful. Most programs will have a 501c3 organization in place to accept donations. So your viewers can look into making donations to some of those 501c3s in order to support those other things that aren't necessarily taken care of by the court process. But those are really the ways that they can support veterans courts and treatment courts in general.
That's all great information. Thank you so much for joining us, JC. Christian, I haven't had a chance to give the mic over to you. Did you have any questions that you wanted to extend to JC about veteran treatment courts?
I did, actually. I just wanted to pick your brain for a moment. Given the level of involvement and the success rate that you have with these veterans, what sort of percentage, I guess, of repeat offenders do you see at all, if any?
Yeah, so that's really kind of the beauty of these courts. They're heavily studied. There are a lot of different components to these courts, but one of them involves capturing data that can be used to improve the program and improve outcomes. And these are just general numbers that on treatment courts in general. But the recidivism rate, which is what you're talking about, the likelihood that people will go out and commit new crimes after completing these programs, is significantly higher, or significantly lower, I should say, than people that were just involved in the regular criminal justice processes. So there are studies that were put out by the Department of Justice, Wisconsin Department of Justice, and also the Department of Corrections that were used as part of that TAD program that I discussed before. And in the case of drug offenders, folks that graduated from treatment courts after 3 years have a 10% less recidivism rate than folks that did prison time. So the numbers there are significant. When you're talking about property offenses, it's even less. So with treatment court graduates, the recidivism rate there is only about 14%, as opposed to the people that serve a term in the state prison system. There, the recidivism rate is 41%. So there's a significant difference in terms of people that graduate from the program versus people that just stay in the regular system and go through that. And it's because of the treatment, the care, the long-term help. It's all the effort that is put into these programs that make them so successful. As I said before, they are long, they are hard, they cost money up front, but at the end of the day, they make both sense from the standpoint of the community and also fiscal sense. So that same TAD study took a look at the kind of return on investment for these programs. And what they concluded, and they used a very conservative formula, but what they concluded is that for every dollar that was invested in these programs, there was a savings of over $4. On the national level, some of the figures say that for an investment of every $1, the return is a savings of $27. And that's because you are saving on new criminal activity. You're saving for all of the court costs associated with that. You're saving on incarceration. You're saving on all of the problems that victims would have for the additional activity. So there's a huge amount of savings associated with these programs. That's why they make sense both on a practical level and also on a humanitarian level.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. And that really, I thank you very much for sharing that, because that really shows the power of programs like this. So thank you very much.
Sure.
Lastly, JC, if anyone would like to get in contact with you about getting involved with the Milwaukee County Veteran Treatment Court, how can they do that? Is there a good way for them to connect with you?
So they can certainly reach out to me, but I can give you the name of the coordinator for the Milwaukee County Veterans Treatment Court. That's even better. His name is Jake Patton. And he's an Afghanistan vet too. He's been in that program. He's been in that coordinator position for about 3 years now, and he's a great guy. I've worked with him for years, so you can reach out to him, and he'll be able to set you straight and get you connected with the program. I don't have his email address handy, but he's really the point of contact for that program.
Got it.
Or they can just walk into, it's Judge Cindy Davis's court. They can, I'm not sure if they're doing it in person or whether or not it's still over Zoom, but they can always Zoom in for it. And it's open court. They can sit in anytime on Wednesday mornings and see what happens in the Veteran Treatment Court, Milwaukee County.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We're coming up on time here, so wanted to make sure to be respectful of both of your time. But just thank you for sharing this information. I mean, the clear takeaways for me about veteran treatment courts are that they work. It's worthwhile. It's worthwhile on a humanitarian as well as a fiscal level. And hopefully we can see a dramatic expansion of treatment courts available in the state of Wisconsin, because they seem like just fantastic resources. And this month we've been focusing a lot on legal issues. We've been focusing a lot on legal resources, and I can't think of a better way to kind of cap off our legal month than talking about programs like the Veteran Treatment Court. So, Commissioner Moore, thank you so much for joining us and talking with us.
Absolutely. Happy to do so. And thanks for your attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here. Thank you, all of you who joined us across our various platforms. Those of you who left comments. Hopefully, as Adam commented on YouTube, that I did it well. I was a good stand-in, at least a good pinch hitter. But thank you everyone for taking the time to join us. We will be back next week with your regular host, Adam Bratz. But in the meantime, please be sure to follow us across all of our social platforms. Sign up for our newsletter, check out our website. All of this information, even more information that we share across all of those platforms, to help and support and be a resource for Wisconsin's veteran business community. With that, thank you all very much and have a great rest of your day.